properly?
100%. Yep. So it doesn't necessarily matter where you are in that timeline of your business. What matters is that you have an open mind to, you have a goal that you want to reach, and then you have an open mind about, what it could look like to get you there. Because sometimes that does look like taking a bit of a step backwards, in a sense, to move forward.
Welcome, everyone, to a brand new episode of the Business Blind Spots Exposed podcast. I'm just going to call it the Blind Spots podcast because that's a lot shorter. But first, let me tell you a little bit about what the Blind Spots podcast is all about. So as I've gotten better and better as a leader, what I've realized is it's not about the numbers. It's not about the profitability. It's not about the revenue. It's all about, do I understand the story and how it's unfolding? And if I can't tell what the story is that's unfolding in my company, with my people, with my customers, my partners, with myself, then guess what? A train wreck is probably going to happen and I'll never see it coming. So for me, I personally started asking more people, what is their perspective? What do they see? Because the more times I heard from others what their perspective was, the less times I got surprised. I don't like surprises. And in business, nobody wants to get a surprise, whether it's an employee leaving or a customer leaving or somebody going to a competitor because they copied just what you did, whatever it may be. This podcast has been put together just so we can start to hear some of these narratives that experts and industry veterans and coaches have seen themselves, so you can start to see some of those narratives yourself. So first, I want to introduce our guests in a minute here and give you a little bit of background. But I want to start out and saying, "Hey, how you doing today, Sarah?"
Hey. I'm doing all right. So excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm very excited about the conversation we're going to have here in a little bit. But today, I've got Sarah, and I'm going to give you a little bit of our background in a second here and why I was excited about having her on. Sarah's going to talk about punching through the business glass ceiling. Gosh, I feel like that's a 5-beer conversation right there.
We could talk for hours.
That's right. So you anyone who's listening, we've got an hour. So if you got some questions, start asking. Let me give you a little bit of background on Sarah, just so you know a little bit about who she is. So she's the founder of a company named Traction IQ. It's a sales and revenue strategy company for business owners. Main area of focus is helping business owners carve out their target market so they have repeatable and sustainable growth. I suspect a lot of people, that's probably one of the keys to making a company go, right? Revenues, repeatable and sustainable growth. Alongside of that, part of why I liked talking with Sarah is that she educates them on laying the foundation that the company will need for future financial events, such as rounds of funding, buying, selling companies, business exit planning. It's this revenue growth are milestones on the way to this story, this narrative that you're building as a company. Well, what I love about what Sarah and I talked about in preparation for this is just this idea that she's laying those milestones so you know where you are and can orient yourself along that way. She spent 15 years working in corporate finance and enterprise sales in Raleigh and New York City. She was always wanted to be an entrepreneur, and while working at a startup in New York City, she said, I think there's time for me to hang up my own shingle. And realized that her background in sales and finance is really valuable to a lot of other folks, which I think it's very, very, very true statement, so that they don't make the same mistakes that she's seen in lots of other places. It's all about alignment. Sarah, did I do you justice there in terms of how I laid some of that out?
That was perfect. I mean, that was almost like I wrote it myself. That was perfect. That was great.
So tell me, and I want to, I do want to make sure I mention our sponsors. Our sponsors are Corralling Chaos, which is a culture assessment company. They'll come in as a result of anyone who chimes in the comments here. Just say your name, and we'll reach out to you. You're eligible to a free culture consultation from Corralling Chaos. They'll come through and help you with up to 10 employees. They'll just show you where the misalignments occur in terms of the language. And also Carmo, who does a data analysis of your company in terms of the alignment. So you can find out what are you actually looking for, and is that a leading indicator of what's actually happening? We'll give that assessment to you as well. So With that said, I'd love to hear from people in the audience who are listening in if there are particular questions that have brought you to the conversation today. Let's start lining them up. Otherwise, Sarah, tell me first, when you come in and people start asking you for help, where are they? Why are they asking for help?
Yeah, that's a great place to start because it comes from a couple different areas. A lot of times people are looking at something, one of the ways that I can help them with, whether they are a startup and they're looking for help in getting like a pitch deck together, they're looking for help with that kind of thing. I'm always going to still circle back to the other reason that people come and reach out for help. And that is to help find their target market. So whether you reach out because you're looking to help, carve out your target market, or you're coming in because you're ready to do some sort of, you're ready to put a pitch deck together. You're ready to talk about like what it could look like to reach certain financial goals, like eventually selling your company or things like that. I'm still going to circle back and we're going to cover all of that stuff because I feel like there's a certain level of a foundation that needs to be laid before I can help with either one of them, really. I have to know your long-term goals and I have to know who your target market is, because that's going to help us to get you where you want to be.
So you said startup, but it doesn't have to be a startup. It can be a company that's been established, excuse me,
Yep.
that's been running for quite some time. Either look, companies go through multiple different stages. I mean, first time you decide to hang a shingle out of your own as a company, it might take you 2-3 years to kind of get what I'll call your sea legs under you, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
And once you've done that, you say, all right, so now it's no longer about having 2 to 3 people. How do I get to 25? And it's an evolution you've got to go through.
Right.
And coming in to help them build that framework is partly what you can do.
So part of scaling is part of what I do. It's a lot of work with directly with the business owners. I kind of call it, I use what I like to call a tactical consulting model, which basically just means that we focus on small scale actions that serve their long-term end goal. So that can look like things such as, again, it can be ideation, concept development, it can be target market research, it can be business plan creation, it's sales process consulting. So like making sure that the right tech stack is in place. Like I call that part like working smarter, not harder. There's no reason to have your technology working against you. So making sure that like for what you're doing, that you have like the right processes in place, all the way up until like going through like fundraising, or even like, talking about like what your business exit plan could look like.
So it's, I talk all the time to people about this idea that an analogy I use is this idea you could have a 300-watt light bulb, which is a really, really bright light. Right. But a 300-watt laser will burn through steel, right? You could have plate steel, and a 300-watt laser is a pretty powerful thing. Mm-hmm. And I think what I'm hearing from you is you can have started, could have started something out. You got your business up and running. Mm-hmm. But if you want to get to that laser-like focus and laser-like strength, directed energy, then that's kind of where you can help out. Am I understanding that properly?
100%, yeah. So it doesn't necessarily matter where you are in that timeline of your business. What matters is that you have an open mind to, you have a goal that you want to reach, and then you have an open mind about, what it could look like to get you there. Because sometimes that does look like taking a bit of a step backwards, in a sense, to move forward. So
lots of times when you come in, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, I can give you an example.
Oh yeah, please. I would love that's actually what I was leading. I was like, so
yeah, let that kind of vague. So a good example of that would be, so I think that as anybody who's starting a new business, or has an idea for a problem that they want to solve, they're likely working backwards. So you find the problem and then you create the solution and then you go searching for your target market. That was me when I started, my consulting business, and it was every company that I'd worked for in sales. And so far it's been every single company that I have helped as a consultant as well. So I think that, it's about just being, like I said, being open-minded, being willing to like take a step back and work a little bit backwards. to move forward.
So, tell me a little more about that story there, right? The idea that you've got a capability, you've got a service, product, whatever the case may be, and you said, all right, now I've got this. Now I got to go find the people who want to buy it, which
Right.
is kind of bass backwards, because you should find the people who need something and then go find out what they need. Or, right? Is that what I'm hearing?
100%. Yep. That's exactly what I'm saying.
So is there an example of that? I mean, obviously, keep it
Yeah.
as generic as
Yeah. No.
necessary.
So, for example, well, I can give several. I'm trying to think of how to describe this vaguely, without giving away like company names or anything. So there was a company that I worked with. They wanted to add. They had already created an additional product line, because they saw a good fit in the market for how that would work with their existing products that they had. However, they did not. They thought that in selling this to the types of people that bought their current product, it would be a successful go to market strategy, go to market launch, and it wasn't. It did not work out because the new product met people where they were was in a much smaller scale company is what I mean, than the person who used their current product. So that was, I think, with a little bit of, not a little bit, but a lot of market research. And market research is really something that, product market research, I think, is something that people often overlook, and finding like their niche market. And I know you've done that incredibly well. I think it's just so important to really understand who that market is, know them inside and out, be able to, meet their needs, because at the end of that, they're going to be able to tell you how to build your own product, and then you can go create it from there for them. And then, once they trust you and once they've shared with you, those things, they're going to tell you more ways that, they can use your help, and then you can build even better product for them, or service, whatever that might be. Yeah.
So I've got a comment here from Jerry. Jerry, thanks for chiming in. Good to hear from you. Jerry says, so what are some of Sarah's most common tripping points to hold clients back from being successful in reaching sales numbers?
So things that they're holding themselves back from? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I think I think there's a couple of different dimensions to this, right? But let's maybe start with what do you see most often?
Yeah, I see most often that people are trying to be too much to everybody. Like they're trying to just like meet too many needs, instead of focusing on a smaller scale problem that they can solve for one specific type of client. I see them, I call this like trying to be all things to all people. I mean, that's not a new phrase, but I think that as especially a small business owner, you're like, well, I can meet that need, I can meet this need, I can meet that need. But then you're so exhausted because the whole reason you start to forget the whole reason that you started doing what you do. Because you're moving away, you move away from that when you try to be too many things to too many people. So that's really the number one thing that I see.
So why do you think that happens? I mean, I'll be the first to admit I'm the poster child for this.
I know about it.
Yeah. It took a little while for me to get to the point where I said, I don't want to service everyone. I just want to just do this. And then as soon as I did it, boom, stuff started happening.
Yeah.
Why do you think that happens so often? It seems like it's almost a natural tendency for that to happen.
It is. It 100% is. I think it happens because we're excited. We're like, okay, oh, people want my, it's like people want my service. They want what I'm doing. They want this. And you want to be able to provide that because you think that that's what's adding value. But I think one of the things that I try to like really drive home is that true adding of value is understanding, like I said, a customer so well that you just like you can really meet their specific needs. And I think that that's such a beautiful thing for a business owner to like understand and embrace. And I think that it empowers them, it empowers their clients. But it's really hard because you just naturally want to fix every problem that comes your way.
So I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story of my own personal journey, and I hope this resonates someone because looking back lots of lessons learned here. Number one is you get all excited about what you can do, right? You're like, oh my gosh, I've got this thing, but you're not encapsulating it in those words. You're encapsulating in your own words. I can do this, that, and the other, and flux capacitor, and then the world is magic. And people are like, I have no idea what you just said, right? And you're like, well, why aren't you buying this? When in fact, you get to the point where you've talked to them so much that before they even say something, you already kind of know what the next word is going to, and how they think and what words they're going to use. Then all of a sudden, it's you just have to wait. It's almost as though you're opening the next door for them, and they just keep walking through the next one. Does that resonate at all?
Yep. Yeah. And I mean, I've also, like, I think that part of why I feel the way I do about this is because, as a salesperson, working for, mostly I've worked for technology companies. As a salesperson working for a technology company, there's a very popular saying that's like, just cast a wide net and, see what you can get back. And that is probably the worst advice you can give a salesperson or a business owner, which I think translates like pretty well to each other, because as a salesperson, you are owning a certain piece of a business. And as a business owner, you own the whole thing. But I do think that that can get really messy, because it's just, it's kind of like, it's just not a sustainable business model. And again, it like goes back to like trying to be all things to all people, casting a wide net and like seeing what sticks. It's just not, there's no strategy. My point is there's no strategy there. And I truly think that, even if you're going back and you're retweaking your strategy, like, regularly, weekly, monthly, whatever that looks like, just having something in place that gives you guidelines to like help you feel like you're moving forward is so helpful.
Yeah, it's interesting. Just from a personal and self-awareness point of view, there's lots of narratives that go through my own head. As in, oh, I'm too close to my own baby, so I can't really call my baby ugly, right? And especially if I've built it from the ground up, or birthed it from the ground up, whatever the right analogy is, right? At some point in time, you can't see those flaws, but someone else, they could care less what you believe about your own kid, right? Yeah. They see it from their point of view, and I think what I'm hearing from you is so often, and I number one in line of having done this many times over, you're like, oh gosh, I've built this fantastic company to provide this service or this product. Everyone's going to love it because I've seen that problem before,
right?
But I'm not delivering it to them in a package that they can receive. Does that resonate?
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
No, I was just I was just thinking, like, you've got to meet people where they are. I got a question last week actually from someone that was like, well, what if I'm working with an industry that is not, we're a technology company. What if I'm working with an industry that's not very technology savvy? And they're like, how do I get them? How do I educate them on how to use our tools? And I was like, honestly, you probably don't, because like you can't change an entire industry of, you've got to meet them where they are to a certain degree. And really understand their business well enough that you're providing a service or product that works for them and not against them. And it sounds like you might be trying to fit like a square peg in a round hole there a bit. So yeah, I thought that was interesting. I was like, maybe don't, maybe just.
Yeah, someone told me once before, Vinay, stop focusing on how you do it. Start focusing on the impact, right? And if it's someone who is not technological, or it's an industry that's not technologically savvy, mm-hmm. Well, what is? And I don't like necessarily always using the pain point, but where's the feeling that you can help alleviate?
Yeah.
I mean, if they're feeling frustration every day because they're trying to manage employees, well, hey, there's the conversation to have. It's not about the technology, right?
It's not about, yeah. You got to meet them with the service that works for them to help them, not try to make their lives more complicated because you think this is the way they should work, right?
Yeah, I talked to a prospective customer about something, and we started getting into the weeds a little bit. And I said, so let's stop for a second. Let's back up. What is it that keeps you up at night? What is it that we're on this call for? And as we started to get back to, well, I wish I had more visibility into this. I was like, well, that's what we do. I take care of all that stuff.
Right.
This is what it'll look like. Is that interesting?
Yeah.
Right? They don't care about how
Mhm.
what happens behind the curtain, right?
No, they don't care. They don't.
That's what they're paying you for.
Yeah. They don't care at all. They don't care at all.
So how have you coached people, or how, I mean, tell me how there's a shift that's got to occur in that, having problems speaking today. Um, how does that mindset shift occur? How do you help people through that process?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I think it depends on the different stages that people like reach out to me or we work together on. Because, like I said, um, really the services or the services I provide, I like to think of them as an ecosystem that are creating like long term like success for your business. And you know, as I mentioned before, where depending on where they reach out to me and what their problems are, we might go back, 3 or 4 steps and work on something else for a while that leads up to actually the goal that they're looking to solve at that moment. For example, like I mentioned earlier, somebody who might be, let's say, let me think of an example. Okay, so I've been working with a client who is looking to scale their business from around $500,000 in revenue a year to over $1 million. In doing so, this is part of the process for how she wants to create her exit plan strategy. And then to do that, it's almost necessary for me to understand, well, like, how do you reach to your clients? How do you market to them? Like, who is your target market? And then build it up from there, because in order to get you where you want to go long term, you have to understand like how you're helping a specific market. Like I've said this like 3 times now, but like you have to understand them so well that is exactly, you feel confident about, what it's going to look like. Okay, let me step back for a second, actually, on myself, because you kind of mentioned this earlier, but it's a bit of like drinking your own Kool-Aid, right? Like sometimes we hear ourselves say the same things over and over and over and over again. And like, it's almost like when we get off path of like, and then that's when we're trying to be all things to all people. If we can get back and refocus on what it is that like brought us into doing this to begin with, and then we can drink our own Kool-Aid and like believe in ourselves and believe in our business, that's when you can like actually put in a plan to like make goals happen.
Yeah, it's interesting. The thought that came to mind is, I've done some coaching for entrepreneurs and things myself, and one of them said, we'll have the best customer service, and I go, oh gosh, please, I don't know. That's a little bit of a pet peeve of mine, right? I can't tell you how many, whether it be an HVAC company or a roofing company or the Monday.com or whatever, online, offline, whatever.
Right.
I say, we've got the best customer service. I said, I'll be the judge of that, not you.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, everybody says I have the best customer service.
Of course, because you want it to be.
That's right. But actually getting me to say yes, that is, you've got the best customer service, and actually having, and what the customer service you have today, there's a gigantic delta between those two, right?
Mm-hmm.
So getting the customers to kind of start nodding their head saying, yeah, I believe that, is actually more important than you believe me. You've got the best customer service in the world, right?
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. And now as I'm saying it, it seems like it should be kind of obvious to all, but sometimes the most profound things are those things that you just kind of take for granted, right?
Absolutely. And it's hard. I mean, there's a lot of vulnerability that comes into play here. And when you're asking for this type of help, when you're asking for these types of services, sometimes you think that it's just going to be very straightforward. You think it's going to be very like black and white. She's going to come in. She's going to look at some of our financial records. She's going to take a look at what this looks like. She's going to make some recommendations and then move on. But it really is. It is more of like a holistic kind of approach. And for me, it does actually come from a pretty personal place where, working, I actually sold the technology that companies use for mergers and acquisitions for many years. That was primarily the technology that I sold, working for tech companies. And in doing that, worked really closely with the people who actually executed on those transactions. And when, so I heard all the backroom stories about like why transactions failed, why they didn't go through, why they didn't do that, why they didn't do this. Was it that their financial records were just a disaster? Was it that, they were, the money just was, anyway, did it take too long and the buyer got disinterested? So many things. And it's heartbreaking. And for me, as a salesperson who was selling that type of technology, it was frustrating because I would lose out on my commission. So that was reason number one that it was frustrating for me. But then also I was like, holy cow, these business owners, like they put their heart and soul and all their hard work into their business. And then they're banking on this like end goal. They're banking on this transaction to go through that could be really life-changing. And if it doesn't, like, what are they like, then what, like, how do they go back? So that's really a lot of where this started for me. Was in learning that, and then being being immersed in surrounded by company founders in a WeWork in New York City, and just being the natural salesperson I am, I just ask a lot of questions. What does your strategy look like for this? What does your strategy look like for that? What are your plans here? What are your plans there? Do you plan to bring in investors? Do you want to have seed funding? Do you do this? Do you do that? What's your CRM? What does this look like? And they started answering my questions, and I was like, oh, I think I can actually like help here. So I've scaled back, and I've done a lot of my own market research, and it's changed. It changes a lot. It's changed a lot in the past year. But yeah, so that's really where a lot of this comes from and why it's a bit personal to me.
So tell me, what piqued my interest in all, there's a couple of things there, but the thing that piqued my interest the most is what were, generically speaking, or tell me whatever detail you can, what are the, give me 3 reasons that a deal didn't go through, and tell me a little bit about that sort of scenario. Because I think, and let me tell you why I'm asking, is because I suspect this is going to help me in the future. Is number one, no, just to understand how the other side is thinking. But I think that also may put some humility into how strong you think your company is, because someone else is looking at it from the outside saying, "Yeah, that's a bunch of junk."
So the number one reason that they fail is poor planning and execution. Wow. I don't know. I mean, depending on the size of the deal, and like I said, when I was selling the technology for this, they were much larger than what I personally help folks prepare for now. But when I say planning and execution, I mean, when you're thinking about how you get your financial documents in order to go through a transaction like that, if they are not, most people just don't have everything in order. And it's a lot of information. I don't know. Have you ever sold a company? Have you ever?
Yes, I have.
Okay. I thought you had. I thought I remembered you mentioning that before. It is pretty brutal and humbling to have somebody basically come in and look at all of your financial records and basically be like, okay, well, we need this, we need that, we need this, we need that. And you're like, oh my God, I thought everything was here. It's not here. And yeah, so everything I do, really, I want to lead up to somebody when they're going to do, if they're selling their company, if they're just leaving it to a family member, if they are going for a round of funding, I just want to make that process as easy as possible for them.
So I'll recount a little bit of how I remember in a very much shorter period of 6 months that distilled to maybe 4 or 5 minutes here. Hopefully not that long. But, the first time that these potential acquirers of my company asked me, so hey, we'd like to we'd like these financials. They give us a list of things. Mm-hmm. All right, I pulled out this nice notebook and put a little thing in the front and had little tab sections and a table of contents. Here's where everything is, right? Probably about 2 months later, every single time I got an email from, God, again? It'd probably be the same document that I had in there, but it's been updated by a month, and I had to send it to them again. Yep. Yeah, it was a painful process, and they want to make sure that you're not kind of fudging numbers, so they want to see it again just to make sure that you send them the same thing that you did last time. Yep. So, but the purpose of that, of talking through that, is not. The lesson learned for me is that if I want to build an intentional plan to get somewhere,
Mhm.
I need to build those milestones to do that. And so we ended up getting a business broker involved who kind of helped
Yeah,
us prepare all of that.
as you should. As you should. I'm not a business broker, but I know a lot of them, and they're wonderful people. And I always have people that I recommend people to. So yeah,
Yeah, I have no idea how we would have done that without him.
yeah. Never try to do that yourself.
Yeah, he actually liked that stuff.
Yeah.
Not me.
Yeah.
So, and to kind of bring this back, I think the message I'm getting, or what I want to try to make sure that we sort of uncovers one of the blind spots, and I've been jotting a bunch of them down, is this idea that if you have this plan or pathway to continue scaling,
Mhm.
building the pathway of getting there is not an accident. It's not something that you just kind of stumble upon. You actually create that focus on doing it.
Mhm.
And by coming in from the outside, you can give them that holistic. There's a couple of things missing here. I see where you're trying to go, but maybe there's a bridge too far in step 3 and 4.
100%. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, and like I said, sometimes I think people have to be. Yeah, there's a bit of self-awareness involved. There's a bit of being humble involved. That part is really hard when you're like, well, I'm running this. Our numbers look great. They're doing well. And I think that that's one of the hardest parts is that, a lot of times when your revenue does look good on paper, it might not necessarily look good to the company that is wanting to buy you for a number of different reasons, but that's a whole other podcast. I think you got the guy coming up in a few weeks to talk about that.
That's right. Yeah.
But you want to make sure that that you've I think, and I'm a pretty, by nature, I'm kind of a planner. I don't know, maybe this is why this works for me, but I think you just want to make sure that you've put all the steps in place that you can to make sure that you get the most value out of your company for whatever that transaction looks like.
So, do you think that there's been a shift in? I start to hear this word humility and empathy and these topics and terms a lot more. I personally believe there's a lot of value in those words. Do you feel like there is a lot more of that is involved in running business today than maybe 10, 20 years ago?
I don't know if there's more that's involved today, or if it's just something that we actually talk about today. I think that it's something that even behind the scenes, 10, 20 years ago, whether or not you talked about it, you felt it. Now I think it's just something that's a little more widely accepted and that people are open to talking about and they're familiar with, and which I think is awesome. I think it's such a beautiful thing where, I think as a business owner myself now, I can sit in a room with other business owners and I can say where I'm struggling, and I can feel heard and I can feel safe, and I can, leave space for somebody else to also share those things with me. And, we can just sort of like, we might not be able to solve each other's problems, but we can just sort of like sit in that moment together and just sort of, appreciate where each other comes from as a business owner. So, yeah.
and where do you think the value is in that? Because there's not definitive answers there. Sure, we talk about, hey,
yeah,
gosh, Sarah, I'm just struggling with this thing, retaining my employees and keeping them motivated and engaged, right? It's an absolute pain in my backside, and I'm always worried another shoe is going to drop and 2 employees are going to leave, and gosh, I don't want to get back on a route again, or I don't want to be doing this, right? There's no answers there. There's no black and white answers there. Is there still a value in that level of conversation?
I think so. I think that it takes away some of the lonely. This is not from like what I do for a living point of view. This is just like personally me speaking. I think there's value in it, and just that you don't feel as alone. I think a lot of business owners have gone at this very much alone. Even sometimes when they have a partner in the business, they still sometimes feel quite alone because you wear different hats, you have different responsibilities, and maybe you're not always on the same page of goals and things like that. So I think in that it just makes you not feel alone.
That's
you're not the only one. Yeah, you're not the only one that feels that way. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm part of a group called EO, and that's part of the reason I'm part of that is just there are some things, there's tears that I have to kind of cry silently in the corner because they keep me up at night, but I can't really share that with anybody else. And now I have an opportunity to do that. And they say, oh yeah, we've been there too, which, so bringing it back to sort of the planning and the sales and the execution of the company. I kind of started down this path of sort of this empathy and understanding and compassion. I think there's a transformative process that in order to be able to, what got you here today is not going to get you through tomorrow, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And what you're going to do is you're going to kind of help them holistically take a look at where are the things that are enough to just get you through today. Did I say that right?
Yeah. And I think that I think also too, when you start to think about, I think one of the hardest things that I've seen, I'm going to maybe branch out a little bit and then come back to this point, to your point. One of the hardest things that I've seen are people who have to exit their business unexpectedly, or people who might have to, let's say, for a number of reasons, but let's say, last year with COVID, things were so hard on business owners. There was obviously a lot of small businesses did not make it through. How do you necessarily come back? You can't plan necessarily for things like that. But if you think about, some of that stuff ahead of time, what you potentially could want your exit plan to look like, even when there's unforeseeable things that come up and come your way, they might be, having that plan in place might be able to get you through or get you over some of those humps. I mean, last year might be a bit of an outlier. That might not be the best example, if I'm being honest. But if you think about any other bumps in the road that could come up in your business, and you might have to, switch gears pretty quickly. Look at the market crash actually of 2008 and how people had to switch gears from working in one market to potentially working in another. I think having that long-term strategy in mind helps you when you're kind of weaving and bobbing through more unpredictable times.
Well, I mean, it's also easy if you can go to somebody and say, hey, here's the plan, right? Right. Here's the binder with all the tabs and all the, because then somebody else can kind of come in behind you. And it doesn't have to be a life-changing event that does it. But at some point in time, if you want to scale it, being able to give that to a number one, say, here's the plan, makes it easier for them to go and execute it. 100%.
Yeah. And you don't, and the thing too is that, plans can change. I think it's just kind of having a goal in mind and then being open to going back and understand, if you're early on in your business and you're talking about how eventually you want to sell it, that's great. But, that might change between point A and point R, whereas you might change your mind. But being able to go back and reevaluate what your goals are, I think over time is really, really important. And I don't think people look enough into the future, think enough about their future. As a business owner, I think most people are so focused on today and what this day looks like, what this week, which feeds into this week, which this month, this quarter, this year, Yeah.
So, as I've been thinking through this, one of the things that sort of was occurring to me is that, let me start with this. There's something I've been using as a framework of methodology, which is EOS, Entrepreneurial Operating System. Mm-hmm. Specifically, there's a book written by the author of that called Rocket Fuel, and he talks about the visionary and integrator relationship.
Right.
In my company, I very squarely fall into the visionary role. And I was getting drawn into doing lots of day-to-day activities, which is, gosh, talk about a square peg, round hole.
Were they not bringing you joy?
Not at all.
They were not.
Yeah. I mean, I've been a technical guy in the past, so being able to get into been an operations guy, run operations before, and that's when I learned that that's not who I am. But bringing an integrator into the company, who I say it one time, she understands it, and now it's getting done. I was like, oh my gosh, it's been the most, it felt like 85,000 pounds, not 800 pounds, 85,000 pounds were lifted off my shoulders. Oh yeah, it was great. Do you find that most of the companies that you come in and work with, have they had the opportunity to make that kind of shift themselves? The person who came up with the initial idea and is kind of the visionary of the company has been able to shift that to somebody else?
Sometimes. I think it just depends on that. I think it just depends. There are, I think that some that sometimes it's really hard to know. Speaking of blind spots, where your blind spots are, and I think you're like sometimes people are like, well, I have this idea, so I have to be able to do all of these things in my own company, and I have to be able to fix all of these things because I need to understand how all of it works, and that's not necessarily true. To your point, and exactly what you're saying, and that weight that you felt lifted off. I mean, that is that is what is going to make your business successful, is that you can now that focus on what makes you it's what keeps your drive, it's what keeps you motivated, it's what drives you, and then the person who you pass that off to, that's most likely what drives them if they're good at what they do. So I think that, I said this earlier, but that's part of drinking your own Kool-Aid, is being able to see, like, making, looking at who you are as a person, and where you bring the most value to the table, and then thinking, like, where do I struggle the most? I've struggled with that part myself, because I want, I think that's where some of the stuff I come up with, and some of the ways I help people is that I'm like, well, I've been struggling with this too. Maybe somebody else is as well. But yeah, I think that's a big piece of understanding, like, of your own goals, is to know your own blind spots.
So I recently went through an exercise where I took my company why and my personal why, and I did an exercise to separate the two.
How simple.
My gosh, just doing that exercise alone was just super powerful for me. And seeing kind of because someone mentioned to me, a coach who does, works with some companies, he said, you'll find, he was working with a company where the owner was still imparting his will on the direction of the company.
Mm-hmm.
He said, at some point in time, Vinay, you can no longer be the Superman. The company has to be the Superman. Mm-hmm. And as long as your why and the company's why are so closely intertwined, you'll never see that. Yep. But you'll never be satisfied either. Yep. And it sounds like that's what you're able to help people do, is tease those two things out, saying, so is this a you goal? Is this a company goal?
Yeah. And one of the hardest things that I've been through, or I've seen people go through, is that, when you think that you're on the right path as a business owner, and we start to do a little bit of market research together, and you realize that, there's other markets that actually might be benefit more from what you're doing, and you got to switch gears a little bit. That's tough. That you might, that's a tough place to be. Some people don't want to hear that, so they just don't do it. But yeah, you're 100% right. And I think that, it is, yeah, you're 100% right. Your why and your business's why can't be the exact same thing, but there isn't a place that they have to overlap. Yeah. If you are still going to lead a company and inspire people, and yeah.
So give me some examples of when you came into companies, kind of where they started and where they are today, or where you left.
Yeah. So, the majority of the companies that I've worked with, so since I've been back in North Carolina, I have worked with folks outside of the tech world. When I was in New York, I worked with several startup founders, and that's where they came in. They were mostly like pre-seed stages. I worked with those folks up until they were, the furthest one we got was through a Series C, before I stopped working with them as an advisor. And then, here in Raleigh, I'm working on hoping to meet more people in the tech world. I'm trying to immerse myself in that world more. But I've also started working with a lot more of just business owners who provide a service to people. So folks, especially in the wellness space, that's kind of been an area that I've seemed to provide a lot of help. So.
So walk me through that. I mean, so you walked in the door. I mean, one Series A. So they've raised many millions of dollars. Where did you start with them? What was the sort of the original, I'll call it original statement of work, and what was the sort of the ending statement of work?
Yeah. So the original statement was, when I met them, it was actually somebody that I shared the WeWork space with when I came up for the idea of my company, and they just humored me and let me ask a ton of questions, to the point where I was like, I can help you with that, right? And in this particular situation, it was an engineer. It was somebody who'd come from a larger technology company who had created a technology platform and had no experience in sales. So we worked from everything from, we started with the market research. We reached out to current clients, tried to understand why they bought. Then we moved through, pulling themes from that to like another market and reaching out to people on like LinkedIn and just through personal contacts to interview people, see if that was the right kind of target market. From there, we did their sales. This was the beginning of 2018. And they, by the end of the year, had gone through, several rounds of seed funding, which was exciting. And, since then, they're about to actually compete. They're about to go through their Series C. So that's where we're at right now. But they started really from the beginning, and they're a lot of the inspiration for why, I came up with the whole concept of this company and, really have tailored it to a lot of the things that I've helped their needs. But I'm also constantly trying to reevaluate what I provide people and is that really something that's necessary, and how do I reach, into a different market, and is this the right? Yeah. So pretty much everything that I try to help other people with, I'm also trying to put back into my own business.
So how would you know, how does someone know that they need some outside help?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think a lot of times you don't. I think for me, it's people where I do speaking engagements or I do like, networking events, and people are like, wait, you do what? And then I kind of explain a little bit more, and they're like, oh yeah, that actually sounds really cool. Because I think that a lot of times people don't look for somebody who does necessarily what I do. So, yeah. Does that make sense?
So I just had a conversation about it this morning about how if ego is a really, really powerful yet blinding tool. I mean, I can't think of a single person that you go to and say, do you need help, as a way to start a conversation. They'll say, yes.
Never.
Nobody ever says yes, right?
You got to the groundwork. You got to educate. You got to say, this is how I provide help, and this is the things I do. And then that's when, you hope that people will be like, oh, that sounds kind of cool. I'd like to learn more. And then that's when, we engage, and then I kind of learn certain goals and things like that.
Yeah. I mean, even with our customers, I mean, if I came in and told them that management tends to be the place where the most potential for growth lies, the ego punches. We're fine. We're doing great.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a couple questions.
It's a tough place. That's tough.
Yeah. I mean, I think for myself, and I try my level best to check my ego at the door, because I know there's 10,000. If I know two, there's 10,000 things I don't know. Just balancing kind of how fast I can learn it all and see what I don't know, because I can only digest so fast as well. Right. That's the other side of it. Yeah. So, lots of people, what I'm hearing is a lot of people don't know that they don't know what they don't know, which is they need some help. Yeah. But that's probably just a black and white sort of thing. Everyone needs some help.
The truth is everyone needs some kind of help. It might not be what I provide. It might be what somebody else provides. Maybe I can make reference to that person. Maybe I can, but I try to put myself out there as much as possible to do like presentations and education. And I try to network pretty regularly, so that, just in case it does spark somebody's interest, that they might be willing to talk.
Yeah. Because I think a lot of people they don't know what they don't know, and therefore they don't know to ask the right questions. I mean, in the whole customer journey, the first one is awareness. You just got to be able to call it something first.
Exactly.
I got an employee absenteeism issue. Huh. Was anyone use the word and then when they hear someone talk about this word employee absenteeism, yeah. That's what. Can you say that word again?
What does that look like? Can you give me examples of like how this works? Yeah.
And then they start asking the questions. So what does employee absenteeism look like? Yeah. Well, you have some employees that don't show up 18% of the time, or work 18% less
Mhm.
than someone else. Yeah, that well, keep telling me, keep talking, right?
Yeah.
And it sounds like that is where a lot of people get stuck. Is that they're feeling some resistance, they're feeling some challenge. They don't know what to call it, and they don't know who to reach out to because they're. I mean, I think part of the fear is I don't know what to call.
Right.
I don't know what I'm asking for.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, and if I'm exposing my own blind spots, like for me, I'm not a good marketer. I'm not good at marketing myself. What I do was my side hustle for a very long time, and so I kept it on the down low. I didn't talk about it. I met new clients through word of mouth or through networking events. So I didn't talk about it. And so now that I'm like out here talking about it, I'm like, you know, I'm not a good marketer. There's a lot of imposter syndrome that sometimes can creep in, and that stuff is real. And so I'm always trying to how can I, if I'm giving people advice, where do I need to do this for my own business? So yeah, that's my biggest blind spot right there.
So throughout the course of this, I have been taking notes. I'm gonna kind of run you back through a bunch of things that I've written down, right? In terms of punching through that glass ceiling that we kind of defined as the topic, right? In order to be able to do that, first of all, it's got to start with this open mind to achieving a goal. If you've got that as sort of if you can say yes to that, then we can kind of move on to step number one, right? And I think I heard from you that you're likely working backwards because you've got a solution searching for a target as opposed to a target market who needs a solution, right? Um, the next thing I wrote down here is scaling your company is not just about selling more, but it's about asking your empathies what they want more of. And sometimes, I mean, Steve Jobs said that most of my customers don't know what they want, right? They have a sense of it, but they don't know what to call it because it's not there.
Yeah, you got to understand their problems. You got to understand where their pain is, and that's what leads you back to it. Yeah.
So another blind spot I heard from you is, focus on one need. Don't try to be all things to all people, because when you go deep, you get you get to show up for that person or that customer in a way that they haven't had before, which is what I think if I insert my own words, that's where you build the loyalty, right?
Mm-hmm. Value.
People are excited about their stuff. Customers aren't. So you got to ask them what they call it.
Yeah, exactly. You got to learn their own language. Yeah.
Yeah, learn their language. The mind shift has to occur in order to reach the next stage. So if you're feeling sort of a block, this glass ceiling, it's probably because it's time for a mind shift. I still can't say that. Mind shift.
Yeah, it's time to just, where is it that, are you trying to be all things to all people? Have you taken on something that you don't feel comfortable doing? For me, like I said, my social media marketing, that is like not my comfort zone. So that's where I'm looking for someone right now to help me with that. What does that look like? Like where, yeah, when you come up against that roadblock and you just don't feel like you're drinking your own Kool-Aid anymore and you're not really believing in why you started it to begin with. Let's put some practical things in place, and then we'll get your sales and revenue and to lead towards your end goals.
So I heard from the backroom M&A transactions. The number one reason I heard is poor planning and execution, and I think the take-home message there is not that you need to be worried about you're going to fail in an M&A transaction, because that's not necessarily for all of us.
No.
But that is what caused fear and risk for those people who would potentially acquire or merge. So the poor planning execution at that point in time was a blind spot for them, but that also could be for anyone at any point in time throughout the course of that company.
Yeah.
Then the last thing I wrote down here is, if you've got a feeling about your business, someone else has likely had it and has a name for it, so you can start to explore it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really important for me, because lots of times I don't know what I'm asking. I mean, I think this is you when you're saying just kind of be in a room and sit with people and just kind of say, gosh, I don't know what you call this thing, but man, it's bothering the bejesus out of me. I don't know what to call it.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of where on all these different dimensions, I think that's where you kind of add value, is giving them that third party perspective, looking and saying, Yeah, let me tell you what that's called.
Yeah, and it's and it it's kind of taking a look back, like you said before, like a look behind the curtain, a peek behind the curtain to kind of like let you. And sometimes it's honestly not as scary as you think. Like there's not as much that needs to change as you think there does. Um,
Yeah, I actually just put a post out on LinkedIn yesterday, as a matter of fact, and I said I've stopped subscribing to the idea of servant leadership as the aspirational goal, and I said I'm changing from servant leadership to invitational leadership. Right, I'm inviting people to go to a better place. I don't honestly how who comes up with the idea as to how we take the next step really doesn't bother me so much.
yeah,
Right, I don't want to be the one. I just want to be. I'm already the one who's already told them where the goal is, so I'm already kind of at the front of it.
right.
Who can just help me get there is what's most important to me. Uh,
Yeah,
Someone else can take the credit for it if they want.
yeah, yeah.
Uh,
It's a great
and
point.
and I think that's kind of where a mind shift. So another fantastic stat that I heard. I don't know if you've heard this, but the average Olympic athlete has 11 coaches. I think that's a pretty staggering number.
Yeah,
And
that's a great number.
that means for you to be a world class, you got to have all kinds of people telling you how to think bigger and better, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've got two.
And I think I've got a handful myself. Yeah,
Yeah. And multiple mentors, people that I just look up to and admire, that I ask their opinions on and value very the feedback that they give me.
well, let me tell everyone who's listening in, Jerry. Thanks always for
Yeah,
showing up for me.
yeah,
You do me such a solid, Jerry. Thank you. Um, so I'm going to wrap some of what I heard here up in some show notes, and I'll probably have them out tomorrow for all to see. And I'll put Sarah, if it's okay, I'd like to put your contact information if anyone's
yeah,
got any
absolutely.
questions.
Yeah,
So I'm going to put kind of distill some of the notes that I got here and some of the learnings that I got out of listening to Sarah. I'll probably be posting on LinkedIn just for all those people listening live. You can get the Cliff Notes version tomorrow. But Jerry, thank you for showing up for me as you always do. You welcome, buddy. Thanks again, Sarah. Thank you for taking some time out of your day to walk us through the back rooms of M&A transactions that we'll probably never see ourselves.
no, that was such a weird segue, but yeah, I mean, just a little more insight into the world that I come from.
Yeah, no, I that as soon as you told me about it, I was like, I'm incredibly curious. But thank you. But that's just me. I'm always curious to learn more.
We can have another conversation about that.
That's right. That's another 5 beers right there. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate the time, Sarah.
Thank you so much. Thanks for inviting me and having me today. This is wonderful.
Absolutely. I was happy to have this conversation.